I scrubbed the floors of his mansion for 12 years. I watched him build an empire on my father's stolen research. I warned him about the woman who would destroy him. He laughed in my face and threw me into the streets. Now he's begging at my door. But some debts can only be paid in blood. If you love stories where karma hits harder than a freight train, you're in the right place. Hit that subscribe button because this tale of revenge will leave you speechless. Trust me, you won't see the ending coming. My name is Catalina Torres, and this is the story of how I went from scrubbing toilets to owning the man who destroyed my family. The Blackwood mansion smelled like old money and fresh lies. I knew that smell well because I'd been breathing it since I was 16 years old. 12 years of my life spent polishing silver that cost more than my father's funeral, washing sheets softer than any bed I'd ever slept in, and watching Vincent Blackwood grow from an arrogant college student into an even more arrogant heir to a pharmaceutical empire worth billions. People always asked me why I stayed. Why would a smart girl waste her youth working as a maid? The truth was simple and complicated at the same time. My father, Dr. Ramon Torres, was a brilliant chemist. He spent 15 years working alongside Vincent's father, developing medications that would change millions of lives. They were partners, or so my father believed. Late nights in the lab, shared dreams of helping people, promises written on napkins instead of contracts. My father was a genius with formulas, but an idiot with people. When they finally created the breakthrough drug for chronic pain management, Vincent's father did what rich men do best. He filed the patents under Blackwood Pharmaceuticals alone, buried my father's name in the fine print as a research assistant, and offered him a tiny consulting fee instead of the 50% partnership they'd agreed on. My father fought back with the only weapon he had, the truth. But the truth doesn't stand a chance against expensive lawyers and inherited power. The stress destroyed him. He died of a heart attack 3 months after the drug launched, watching commercials for medicine he'd created while we struggled to pay rent on our one-bedroom apartment. He was 47 years old. At his funeral, Vincent's father showed up in a black suit that probably cost more than our entire yearly income. He put his hand on my shoulder and said, "Your father was a good man. If you ever need anything, the Blackwood family takes care of its own." 2 weeks later, he offered me a job as a maid. I should have spit in his face. I should have burned that mansion to the ground. Instead, I took the job, moved into the tiny room on the 3rd floor next to the laundry, and started planning. Because I knew something the Blackwoods didn't know. My father kept duplicate notebooks hidden in a safety deposit box with my name on it. Every formula, every experiment, every breakthrough was documented in his cramped handwriting. And one day, I would use them to take back everything they stolen. But first, I had to survive. And surviving in the Blackwood house meant becoming invisible, which I was very good at. I watched Vincent grow up, in a way. Watched him bring home different girls every semester. Watched him graduate with mediocre grades, but a guaranteed executive position. Watched him learn the family business of turning human suffering into profit margins. Sometimes, late at night when he'd had too much whiskey, he'd actually talk to me like I was human. He'd ask about my day, make self-deprecating jokes about his failures. In those moments, I almost forgot that his wealth was built on my father's grave. Almost. Then, Diane Ashford entered our lives like a beautiful plague. Vincent introduced her on a Tuesday evening, her hand draped possessively over his arm, her smile calculated and perfect. She was stunning in the way expensive things are stunning, polished, maintained, and completely artificial. An art dealer from old money, she said, though I'd later learned she dealt in more than paintings. She looked at the mansion like a jewel thief looks at a vault, cataloging everything worth taking. And she looked at me like I was furniture. Most people don't see their maids, which is why maids see everything. I watched Diane's sweetness evaporate the second Vincent left the room. I saw her making phone calls in French, thinking none of the staff would understand. I saw her copying files from Vincent's study, photographing documents when she thought no one was watching. and I saw her meeting a silver-haired man in expensive suits at a cafe downtown, their heads close together, his hand on her knee. His name was Laurent Mercier, and he owned Mercier Global Pharmaceuticals, Blackwood's biggest competitor. I knew exactly what Diane was, a corporate spy, a con artist, a predator in Louboutins. And I knew Vincent was too drunk on her beauty and his own ego to see it. So I did something stupid, something that came from the part of me that still remembered Vincent asking about my day, that still saw glimpses of the boy who could have been decent if his family hadn't raised him to be ruthless. I warned him. It was late November, 2 weeks before their engagement party. I found Vincent in his study, celebrating a major contract renewal, expensive scotch making his eyes glassy. I knocked on the open door, and he waved me in with the casual entitlement of someone who'd never been told no. "Catalina, come celebrate with me. Biggest deal of my career." He poured another glass, didn't offer me one. "Mr. Blackwood, I need to talk to you about Diane." His smile faded. "Excuse me?" I'd prepared this speech for days, but the words came out clumsy and desperate. I told him about the meetings with Mercier, but copied files, the phone calls. I told him I'd done research and found that Diane had been engaged 3 times before, always to wealthy men in competitive industries, always ending with the men's businesses suffering mysterious setbacks while their rivals thrived. He listened with an expression that grew colder with every word. When I finished, he set down his glass very carefully. "You're jealous. I'm trying to protect you." "Protect me?" He laughed, and it was the ugliest sound I'd ever heard. "You're a maid, Catalina. You clean my toilets. You don't get to have opinions about my fiancé." Something broke inside me then. 12 years of swallowed rage came flooding up. "Your company was built on my father's work. Everything you have, everything you are, you stole from him. You owe me more than a paycheck and a closet to sleep in. You owe me the truth, and the truth is that woman is going to destroy you." Vincent stood up so fast his chair fell backward. His face went red, then white. "Your father was a drunk who couldn't finish his own research. My father took pity on him, gave him a job, and made something valuable from his scribbled notes. You should be grateful we gave you a roof over your head." I slapped him. My hand connected with his face before I even realized I'd moved, the crack of it echoing in the study like a gunshot. For one frozen moment, we stared at each other, both shocked by what I'd done. Then he pressed the intercom button. "Security, come to my study immediately." 2 men in dark suits appeared within seconds. Vincent's handprint was forming on his cheek, red and damning. "Remove her from the property. She's fired, effective immediately. If she tries to return, have her arrested for trespassing." They grabbed my arms, and I didn't resist. What was the point? But as they dragged me toward the door, Diane appeared in the hallway, that perfect smile on her perfect face. She'd been listening, of course. She walked up close to me, so close the security guards could barely hear her whisper. "I know exactly who you are, Catalina Torres. I know about your father's notebooks, about your little investigation into my background. Did you really think I wouldn't have you watched?" Her breath smelled like mint and malice. "Your evidence? Already destroyed. The copies you thought were safe? Gone. Try anything, and I'll make sure you're charged with theft, corporate espionage, and whatever else my lawyers can imagine. You'll spend the next decade in prison." Then she raised her voice, playing the concerned fiancé. "Darling, are you all right? I told you she was becoming unstable. Some people just can't handle seeing others happy." They threw me out into the November rain with nothing but the uniform on my back. My room had been cleared within the hour, my belongings tossed into trash bags and left on the sidewalk. The apartment I'd rented, owned by a Blackwood subsidiary, of course, was rekeyed before midnight. I had $300 in my bank account and nowhere to go. I spent that night under a highway overpass, shivering in the dark, listening to the sound of cars above me, carrying people to warm homes and soft beds. I cried until I had nothing left, until my tears dried up and something harder took their place. Diane had been right about one thing. I had kept copies of my father's notebooks, but they weren't where she'd looked. They were in a safety deposit box at a bank across town, registered under my mother's maiden name, untouchable and waiting. I'd lost the battle, but the war had just begun. The next 5 years were hell, and I walked through every minute of it with my eyes on the horizon. I lived in shelters, worked 3 jobs, slept 4 hours a night. I enrolled in community college, then transferred to a real university on scholarships and spite. I studied business and chemistry, my father's notebooks open beside my textbooks, learning to speak the language of the people who destroyed us: money, markets, patents, and power. And I met Dr. Helena Worth. She was teaching a graduate seminar on ethical pharmaceutical development, a contradiction in terms if ever there was one. But Helena actually meant it. She'd made millions developing affordable medications for developing countries, then lost most of it fighting patent trolls and corrupt regulators. She was brilliant, principled, and tired of watching good science get buried under corporate greed. When I approached her after class with my father's research, she cried. "This is extraordinary," she said, reading his notes on autoimmune treatments. "Why hasn't anyone developed this?" Because the man who stole it was more interested in profit than people. She looked at me then, really looked at me. "What do you want to do about it?" "I want to finish my father's work, and I want to destroy the people who buried it." Helena smiled. "Then let's build something beautiful." Torres Biomed started in Helena's garage with borrowed equipment and maxed-out credit cards. We refined my father's formulas, ran trials, fought for funding from ethical investors who actually cared about outcomes over quarterly reports. Our first drug, an affordable treatment for lupus and rheumatoid arthritis, launched 3 years later. It worked better than anything on the market and cost a fraction of the price. We became millionaires within 18 months, multimillionaires within 3 years. And I plowed every dollar back into expansion, into research, into building something that would dwarf Blackwood Pharmaceuticals. I followed Vincent's collapse from afar, watching with satisfaction as every domino fell exactly as I had predicted. Diane married him in a ceremony that cost more than most people's houses. 6 months later, Blackwood's most sensitive research data appeared in Mercier Global's pipeline. Lawsuits, regulatory investigations, stock crashes. Vincent divorced Diane, but the damage was catastrophic. The company his grandfather built was circling the drain, bleeding money and reputation in equal measure. Then I learned the beautiful truth. Diane hadn't been working alone. Vincent's own board members, greedy and impatient with his leadership, had hired her to create chaos so they could force a sale to Mercier at rock-bottom prices. Vincent had been betrayed by everyone around him, just like my father had been. The poetry of it was almost too perfect. When Vincent's assistant called requesting a meeting with Torres Biomed, I actually laughed out loud. He didn't know. The company was registered under my mother's maiden name, my own name buried in layers of corporate structure. He was coming to beg for help from a stranger, desperate enough to try anything. I told my assistant to schedule the appointment for the following Tuesday. Then I went shopping for the perfect suit. The boardroom of Torres Biomed was designed to intimidate. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, a marble table that cost more than Vincent currently had in his bank account, art that actually meant something instead of just looking expensive. I arrived early and stood at the window, watching the ant-sized people below rushing to jobs that barely paid enough to survive. I'd been one of them once. Never again. Vincent arrived exactly on time, which meant he was desperate. The man who walked into my boardroom looked nothing like the arrogant heir I'd known. His suit was expensive but outdated, his face lined with stress and sleepless nights, his hands trembling slightly as he clutched a leather portfolio. He'd practiced his pitch, probably in the mirror that morning, trying to project confidence he didn't feel. I let him stand there for a moment before I turned around, watched his eyes register my face, watched the confusion become recognition, become horror. His portfolio slipped from his fingers and hit the marble floor with a slap that echoed like thunder. "Hello, Vincent." His mouth opened and closed like a drowning fish. "Catalina, I don't... How?" "Sit down." I gestured to the chair across from me. He sat because his legs wouldn't hold him anymore. "I understand you're here to discuss a partnership. Something about Blackwood Pharmaceuticals needing capital injection and strategic direction? Please, continue your pitch. I'm very interested." "I didn't know. I swear I didn't know this was your company." "Obviously, you never did pay much attention to the names of people you considered beneath you." I sat down, crossed my legs, watched him fall apart. "But I'm willing to help you, Vincent, for old time's sake." Hope flickered in his eyes, pathetic and premature. I slid a contract across the table. "Torres Biomed will acquire controlling interest in Blackwood Pharmaceuticals. We'll pay off your debts, restructure your operations, and make you profitable again. In exchange, you will publicly acknowledge my father, Dr. Ramon Torres, as the primary developer of your flagship pain medication. You will pay his estate retroactive royalties amounting to $37 million, and you will step down as CEO, with myself as your replacement." The hope died. "You want me to give you everything?" "No, Vincent. I want you to give my father what he earned. Everything you have was built on his genius. I'm just correcting a historical error." "And if I refuse?" "Then Blackwood Pharmaceuticals declares bankruptcy within 90 days. Your family's legacy ends. Your name becomes a cautionary tale about hubris and mismanagement. You lose everything anyway, but at least this way, you get to keep your dignity, relatively speaking." His hand shook as he reached for the pen. Pride and desperation warred on his face, and I savored every second of it. He signed on the 3rd page, then the 7th, then the final page. Each signature felt like justice delayed but not denied. As he stood to leave, broken and defeated, I said, "Vincent, there's one more thing you should know." He turned, and I saw the boy who'd asked about my day buried somewhere under the ruin. "The investigator who exposed Diane's scheme to your board, I hired him. The evidence that turned your board members against you, I provided it. The anonymous tip that led Mercier's lawyers to those incriminating emails, that was me too. I watched the truth sink in like poison. Diane destroyed you because she was greedy and cruel, but I made sure she had the opportunity. I orchestrated your entire collapse, piece by piece, move by move. Everything that happened to you over the last 5 years, every betrayal, every loss, every humiliation, I designed it all." His face went gray. "Why? If you wanted revenge, why not just let me burn?" I stood and walked to the window, looked out at the city I'd conquered. My reflection stared back at me from the window, older, harder, richer, and emptier than I'd expected victory to feel. People ask me if revenge was worth it. The truth? It wasn't revenge. It was justice delayed. There's a difference, even if it doesn't always feel like one at 3 in the morning when you're alone with your victories and ghosts. Vincent Blackwood works in my research department now, developing treatments that will actually help people instead of just maximizing profit. He's good at it when he forgets to be bitter. Diane? She's facing multiple fraud charges across 3 states. Laurent Mercier? His company folded 6 months after I released a better drug at half his price. Turns out, corporate espionage isn't a sustainable business model. Some nights, I drive past the Blackwood mansion. It belongs to Torres Biomed now. I bought it at auction and turned it into a research facility. My old room on the 3rd floor is a storage closet for lab supplies. I stand there sometimes, in that tiny space where I used to cry myself to sleep, and I remember the girl who scrubbed floors and swallowed rage and plotted in the dark. I wish I could tell her, Hold on, your time is coming. The people who hurt you will answer for it. Your father's name will be remembered. You will rise from the ashes they tried to bury you in, and you will burn so bright they'll have to look away. Justice is patient. Justice is thorough. And justice tastes so much sweeter than revenge ever could. If this story hit you hard, hit that like button. Subscribe for more tales where the underdog doesn't just survive, they conquer. Comment below, would you have given Vincent a second chance or would you have let him fall? I read every single comment. Remember, the people you step on while climbing the ladder will be waiting when you fall. Choose kindness, choose justice, because karma doesn't forget, and neither do the maids.